How did Vladimir Nabokov develop such a beautiful style? Because Nabokov is known as one of the greatest technicians of all time. And you and I, as writers in 2024, would love to be able to bring that energy, because if someone brought that energy in 2024, I would be shocked. And so let's learn. Let's learn from Nabokov, who is going to speak at length on how to develop style so that we can go out into the world and kick off a literary renaissance. And that's what we are about here on Right Conscious, talking about the greatest authors and books of all time, but then taking that information and using it to activate ourselves so that we can get to the next level. Let's go, everyone. But enough from me. Let us now hear from Nabokov. Style is not a tool. It is not a method. It is not a choice of words alone, being much more than all of this. Style constitutes an intrinsic component of characteristic of the author's personality. Thus, when we speak of style, we mean an individual artist's peculiar nature and the way it expresses itself in his artistic output. A mode of expression can be perfected by an author. It is not unusual that in the course of his literary career, a writer's style becomes ever more precise and impressive, as indeed Jane Austen's did. But a writer devoid of talent cannot develop a literary style of any worth. At best, it will be an artificial mechanism deliberately set together and devoid of the divine spark. This is why I do not believe that anyone can be taught to write fiction unless he already possesses literary talent. Only in the latter case can a young author be helped to find himself, to free his language from cliches, to eliminate clumsiness, to form a habit of searching with unflinching patience for the right word, the only right word which will convey with the utmost precision the exact shade of intensity of thought. In such matters, there are worse teachers than Jane Austen. And man, oh man, everyone, Nabokov is spitting some heat here, and he said the thing that you're not allowed to say, the it factor, the divine spark. Do you have it or do you not have it? Because if you have it, then you are going to make it happen no matter what. And maybe you need some releasing. Maybe you are constrained. Maybe you have trauma. But without that, you are screwed. And this kind of is an odd thing to talk about, because I know plenty of writers who did good in high school English. They did good in university writing academic essays. They are good at proofreading. They are good at all these different things, but they just do not have the it factor. I used to run a writer's workshop in Las Vegas with my friend, and we saw all different types of authors. I spent 8 years in academia doing creative writing workshops with all different types of people, and I remember I would be in some of my university literature classes with people, and I would hear them speak, and I would even sometimes see them write, and I'd be like, oh God, like they're a good writer. And then I'd see them in one of my creative writing workshop classes, and I'd be like, okay, this is a person to reckon with in this class. Like, I'm excited to see their stuff. And then I would see their stuff, and I'd be like, holy shit, this is terrible. And I know you put a bunch of time into this. For instance, I've told this story before, but in a graduate writing workshop class, this girl who has now obtained a PhD and is a professor for literature, luckily, turned in a story from the perspective of a dog that felt like it was written by like a really dumb fifth grader. And the dog was speaking in English inside its head, but occasionally it would go bark, bark. And like she would write that. And it wasn't like some weird trick where the humans would be listening to the dog's thoughts and hear bark, bark. No, she would just go bark, bark. But in that same class, there was this, I'll just say, a very obese guy who, when you talk to him, oh, yeah, I went to the coffee house, yeah. Like, be dismissive, and if you asked him anything, oh, I don't know. And that dude showed us some heat that was still in the drafting stage that may have been one of the best things I've ever seen in a workshop before. And that guy is MIA. I look up his name at least once a year on Google. Like, where the fuck is this guy? But the reason I'm mentioning all this is because Nabokov talks about how style is a conglomeration of the artist's peculiar personality. And I swear to God, you guys, that if Bark Bark Girl went down to the Amazon and ripped some ayahuasca and then fell in love with the dude from France, she may be a little bit better. She actually cultivated her life and like took some risks and like really put herself out there. That is the only way that she could get better. It doesn't matter how many workshops. We were in a workshop class with a National Book Award finalist. Like, he couldn't help her. No one could help her. And I understand a lot of personality is inherent, but you can character sculpt and you can character build. And that is a very new concept. Someone like Nabokov, who was much older, didn't necessarily understand this. And in the modern world, we can become whatever we want to become. Like, for instance, if you are obese right now, you could, with discipline and following the right plan, get a six-pack. You could be more ripped and more jacked than anyone was back in Nabokov's day. You could become more intelligent and more multifaceted or whatever and learn language faster than, people in the 1900s, early 1900s. Most people don't take these opportunities, but at the core of those transformations is the idea that we can have these transformations. And in the early 20th century, things like psychology were just becoming a thing. Eastern philosophy and pagan spirituality had just started to penetrate the West and not into the everyday modern household. And there was also a lack of art, ability to gain access to artistic material. There, paperbacks were becoming a thing, but now with the amount of, cinema, TV shows, music, books that we all have access to and we're exposed to from a, since a young age, we've basically been primed to become artists in terms of gaining that type of knowledge. And so then if we go out and live in the world and do some crazy shit, suddenly we have the personality. And what's best is if you can do this at the same time, because I've known people who I don't think have like the technical it factor. They don't have that spark. They don't have that ego. They don't have that swag, but they've wanted to be a writer since, their early 20s, but they're also not like order followers or losers. And so they've been living their life. They've been having deep experiences. They've been falling in love and being heartbroken. And so then a decade later, they're ready to really start writing. And that's something that we miss all the time in terms of personality development because of the careerification of writing. That, with the MFA pipeline and all that, people think that they need to become full-time immediately. And if not, then get a professor job and then you just talk about writing. But as I've talked about before, the best authors wait to publish until after they're 30. They sit and they train for over a decade, much like a football player does. If you think about it, a lot of children in athletics start, training and taking it seriously, even sometimes at 7, 8 years old because of their parents, or even let's say 10 or 11. And then by the time they get drafted into professional sports, it's been a decade. And I don't think writing should be any differently. You get to play some games that are important, like your high school state championship game or these college games. And some people are watching, but it's not this big deal yet. You're not a pro yet. And maybe you make some money, but then eventually you hit the pro level if you are good enough and if you care enough. And Nabokov makes an interesting point that over the course of a lifetime, you can perfect this style, that this mode of expression can be perfected and become more precise and impressive. And so if you cultivate something early in your life, and this is the usual course, if you and if you're older, then it can be a little bit harder. But if you are reading and writing and living your life and not worrying too much, and then as you get older, you start doing the things that, I'll say it, that you maybe should be doing, like having a family and trying to raise the next generation, then you have this beautiful base to start working on. Then you can really just offshoot from that, because when I look at a lot of the best authors behind me, when I look at Cormac McCarthy, he was writing in the same mode his entire life. It was really the same feeling and style. He didn't make a shift to Westerns, but you can see that bridge. When I look at Murakami, Wallace, Atwood, Butler, I could just sit and name the names. They're basically, none of them made these massive style shifts. They just kept getting better and better at what they were doing, and then usually hit a peak in, their 40s to 60s. And then if they kept writing, they kind of fell back off, and they moved toward kind of the quality of their early career. And that's kind of the timeline that you can expect for an author. And it's interesting because Nabokov says that, and it feels like he's talking about people who've activated themselves, because if you've gone out on the journey and activated yourself and given yourself the it factor, which I do believe you can do because I've seen it happen before, and I feel like I did that for myself. I feel like I started on the character development journey and took my own development into my own hands and eventually continued that for 15 years. And that's why I'm speaking to you right now. But if you do that, if you can get to this point, then all you have to do is be freed from cliches, to eliminate clumsiness, to learn the patience to sit and revise sentences. That stuff is easy. It's not easy. A lot of people can't do it. I know a lot of intense individuals who have too much ADHD to sit down and revise enough. But before you come to this, that's where you should be at. And that's where style comes from. It comes from a big personality. You can see when Hemingway's writing, you can feel it bleed through the page when McCarthy is writing about the environment. And once again, what's funny is this corresponds with how to grow as an author in 2024. If you are interested in having people read your work, what I teach about in my free writing school, which is available in the description below if you want to come and join us. We already have 1,000 people. We've had hundreds of poems and hundreds of short stories published that would have never been published so far because of the group. I actually forgot what I was saying, but over there, my goal is to unleash people. My goal is to unlock people to the next level. And there are some massive personalities over there. And in general, I could see the potential of those individuals having no limit as other people. So as I teach about my free writing school, that if you have this personality, if you've developed your character, then shifting to talking about your work and being confident in your work and not hiding behind a fake identity, anonymously online becomes much easier, because if you can get good at one thing, then you can get good at another thing. You understand the process, especially if you weren't meant to do it, if you had to go through hardship and these types of things. And the people over there who I think are going to become successful, who are going to become full-time authors, they have that mentality. They have grown. They are open-minded. They've been trying for a while. They've gone through hermit phases and extroverted phases. They've done all of that work, and now they're just ready to explode. They're literally in alignment, because that's what Nabokov is saying here. If you are in alignment, then your style, everything will take care of itself. And once again, back in his day, with the constraints of character, you may not have been able to express yourself fully. But today, there are no limits, you guys. Everyone thinks that there's a limit. Everyone thinks that they are the outlier, and their little problem, or how their parents or their work or their psychopathic ex-girlfriend or father is going to react. They all think that that is holding them back. And those people never grow. But all of us have constraints. All of us have worries. All of us have trauma and BS and judgment in the past and in the present. But you eventually learn not to care, because if you stop thinking about just yourself and think about a higher ideal for your art, then suddenly all of this becomes very, very easy, or at least slightly easier and at least manageable. And so thank you guys for being here. Thank you guys for going on this Nabokov journey with me. Change yourself. Keep growing. Focus on that, especially if you don't like where you're at right now. If you don't like your results, if you don't feel like you can talk about your work, then know that if you work on yourself, then your writing will get better, and you will most likely be on the path to becoming a full-time author, which is technically the goal for a literary renaissance. Because if we have 50,000 people as working as full-time authors, dominating their sub-niche and waking people up, then that will create a movement in art that hasn't been seen in a very, very long time. So thank you guys for being here, and I will see you very, very soon.